A hail of bullets from Foundation assault rifles and submachine guns ricochet off the flawless vibranium surface of the shield. Its wielder stands firm, Steve Rogers, also known as the Avenger and superhero Captain America. He's fought his way through the security of the containment site, beaten down guards and mobile task force operatives. He's even prepared to fight anomalies one-on-one if it comes to that. As the guards prepare to load their weapons, Rogers lowers his shield with a smile and exhales. "I can do this all day," he says with the same Boy Scout charm he's had for nearly 100 years now. But why would the First Avenger be taking on the organization that dies in the dark so we can all live in the light? Keep watching, and you'll find out why. It began as most horrifying stories do, with an SCP-682 containment breach. The monstrous reptile had massacred its way out of a Foundation containment site and rampaged its way to New York City, where it was causing death and destruction in the subways. And while the SCP Foundation was still marshaling its forces, another organization with headquarters in the Big Apple was there to fill the gap. The Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement, and Logistics Division, also known as SHIELD. And with the nature of the threat in this case, they dispatched one of their most powerful contractors, Captain America himself, to spearhead the response effort. Rogers charged into the subway through the throng of screaming people and fought the lizard head-on. A combination of firearms and his vibranium shield managed to keep the monster under control, while other agents assisted in evacuation efforts. Soon enough, a joint task force of SHIELD and SCP Foundation agents entered the subway with heavy weaponry, opening fire on the hard-to-destroy reptile and incapacitating it for containment. But if it hadn't been for the intervention of the Star-Spangled Man with a plan, so many more lives would have been lost. That's why people call him a superhero. That and the fact he defeated enough villains, aliens, and straight-up Nazis to more than qualify. And while Steve had a sense of what to expect from SHIELD, even though he had certain reservations about the way they sometimes operated, it was unfamiliar with the SCP Foundation, and like most ethical people, if he was going to work with someone, he wanted to know what they were all about. That's why he made a request for all of the files that SHIELD had on this occasional partner organization, so he could take a proper look at who exactly they were and what they stood for. And Steve Rogers was disgusted by what he found. The SCP Foundation was, to his perspective, an evil organization. It operated in secret, with no oversight by any of the world's elected officials. With no trials or due process, it trapped often sentient beings in off-the-books containment sites indefinitely, with no chance of parole. They also performed brutal and often deadly experiments on prisoners with little to no empathy for their lives and personhood. To Steve Rogers, the SCP Foundation seemed both cold and unimaginably cruel, and he would bring the whole thing down. Being a man of action, he had no intention of letting this plan wait. He used his reconnaissance training to find one of the offending SCP Foundation containment sites and infiltrated in the dead of night. But he may have underestimated just how prepared the organization was. His presence was soon detected, and every guard in the site was sent in to apprehend him. Full clearance was given for live fire and high-caliber weapons, anything that would potentially bring down the combat potential of the invading early 20th century war hero. Those guards were about to find out why he'd become so feared by the enemies of SHIELD. He effortlessly intercepted and immobilized each guard who came in to attack him, beating them down to the ground and proceeding deeper into the containment site. He may have been a thorn in the Foundation's side, but there was no denying that Rogers was one hell of a fighter. He was a mix of military training, insane experience, and the classified super serum coursing through his veins made him a truly anomalous combatant. If the Foundation wanted to stop this hero from blowing the lid off of their entire operation, they needed to put another anomalous combatant against him. This was how they engaged the Pandora's Box Protocol and called in their Hail Mary response. SCP-076-2, Able. Steve Rogers may have defied time since being frozen during World War II, but the Sumerian warrior under the Foundation's control was on an entirely different level. He was 1,000 years old, functionally immortal through resurrection, and able to summon any melee weapon at will from his pocket dimensions. The other thing you need to know about Able is his greatest drive in life: fighting. not for any external goal or principle, just fighting for fighting's sake. He is a violence-addicted blood knight, and with most mere humans failing to meet his anomalous warrior standards, he's always on the hunt for a worthy adversary. So when an SCP Foundation envoy informed Abel that a truly formidable warrior was tearing through a containment site and had to be stopped, he did not hesitate. Grabbing one of his infamous obsidian blades, he simply asked where he could find this exciting new opponent. If Abel had his way, he'd be sending him to the grave tonight. Back in the halls of the containment site, more legions of guards do what they can to subdue Rogers to extremely limited success. As he'd successfully gone against them when armed with guns, they decided to take a more hands-on approach. They ran towards him with nightsticks and kettle prods, utilizing all of their Foundation close combat training. This went about as well as you'd expect. Each one was easily disabled, and then had the absolute tar beaten out of them by Steve's superlative abilities. At least, being an honorable fighter, Steve wasn't killing any of his opponents. He beat them up just enough that they probably wouldn't be good to fight again for at least a few days. His next opponent would require a greater degree of force to see this thing to the end. 2 bare feet hit the ground with a mighty rumble. Rogers turned to see a towering, tattooed warrior wrapped in ancient cloth, clutching tight to his obsidian blades. The man grinned a wicked grin and stanced up in front of the shield-wielding Avenger.
"So, you are the one they call Captain America,"
Abel said, an undeniable tone of mockery underneath his words.
"You carved through this Foundation stock admirably, but it isn't something I haven't done myself 100 times before. You don't even have the fortitude to kill these worthless whelps. Let's see how you fare in a true life-or-death battle."
Steve furrowed his brow and cocked his head to the side. "Are you with these guys? I'm a little lost here." Abel just laughed.
"Lost? Lost? No, boy, not yet. You're about to be lost, though."
The ancient warrior gave no quarter. He lunged forth with one of his swords, but Rogers sidestepped, delivering a brutal parry with the edge of his shield before barging into Abel. The warrior quickly righted himself, skidding back and getting steady against the wall, but he was impressed with the force of this so-called hero's blow. Perhaps this would be an interesting fight after all. Sword clashed against shield as the two engaged in the delicate dance of battle, stepping around the bodies of the injured and knocked out Foundation guards. The administrators watching over the screens were astonished at how evenly matched the two fighters seemed to be. It was incredibly rare to see a human fighter who could fight a monster of battle like Abel himself. If he wasn't currently breaching their security, they'd potentially even consider hiring him. Back in the hall, the battle continued. Abel pulled out a pair of deadly spiked maces and struck them against the surface of the shield, which rang with an epic reverberating gong. Searing shocks of energy up Abel's thick, sinewy arms. It was exhilarating. He hadn't had a fight like this in years.
"Where have they been hiding you?"
Abel asked.
"I was gonna ask you the same thing,"
Steve replied. Abel didn't let up. He brought down the maces once again, but with a crucial split-second feat of reflexes, Steve intercepted the blows and shattered the maces on contact. Incredible. Abel jumped back and pulled out a series of small throwing knives, tossing them with deadly precision at Captain America. But he was ready. He dodged to the side, avoiding the worst of the onslaught of knives and blocking the rest with his shield. But he didn't want to just play defensive. He tossed the shield at Abel, flying towards him like a highly destructive frisbee. He took the whole force of it to the center of his tattooed chest, knocking the breath from his lungs. But Captain America had just fallen into Abel's trap. He was one of the few beings strong enough to grip the First Avenger's shield and prevent it boomeranging back to its wielder, effectively disarming him. Using his anomalous super strength, Abel smashed the shield into the concrete wall, sticking it in place.
"Let's see how strong you are without your little toy,"
Abel snarled. Steve Rogers was already squaring up and putting up his dukes. "You really don't want to do this, pal," he said.
"Oh, but I do. This is the most fun I've had in years."
The two clashed hand to hand. To Abel's credit, the warrior kept his honor and didn't pull out one of his obsidian weapons against Steve Rogers. He wanted a true test of skill and strength, and by the stars and stripes, Captain America was going to give him one. Abel unleashed his brutally honed battle techniques, perfected over millennia to turn his entire body into a weapon. Every strike was precise, every movement lethal. Rogers countered with elite military training, superhuman strength, and the hard-earned experience of one of Earth's mightiest heroes. He had faced gods and monsters before. Abel was just another challenge to overcome. When Abel came in with a punch, Rogers caught it in a lock and slammed his opponent into the concrete so hard that it sent cracks snaking up the wall.
"There's still time to give up,"
Steve said, expending all his energy to keep the ancient madman in place.
"I don't want to hurt you. You and all the others being kept in this place, it isn't right. Save your moralizing worm."
Abel spat before breaking free, and the fight continued. While the two superhumans clashed in a flurry of feet and fists, the site directors were forming backup plans. They had more heavily armed and armored mobile task forces being dispatched from other nearby containment sites to get the situation back under control. Hopefully Abel would be, able to keep the situation under control until they could move true numbers into the facility. When the backup squads arrived, the battle still hadn't died down. Steve Rogers was many things, but he wasn't a liar. He really could go all day, and Abel was loving it. The two of them were fighting for their lives, but Abel was fighting for even more, for excitement, for glory, for the sheer love of it. And when the backup started pouring in, Abel was furious. He didn't want the fight to end. He didn't want the Foundation to ruin this beautiful battle for him. This kind of thing was a once-in-a-lifetime scenario, and Abel had lived enough lifetimes by now to truly know that. As the troops moved in, Abel roared and unsheathed his blades. He charged towards the MTF members, his supposed allies, and started slicing through their armor. He delivered blow after death blow to the Foundation's front line. It was a horrifying bloodbath, and even though these men were here to help detain Captain America, he couldn't just stand by and watch the wholesale slaughter of human beings. He ripped his shield out of the wall and slammed it down onto Abel's back with such force that it knocked the warrior down onto his knees. He slid the shield onto the back of his tactical outfit and wrapped Abel in a brutal rear-naked chokehold, squeezing until the immortal killer fell unconscious. As darkness fell over his vision, the blood-stained warrior was in ecstasy. Oh, what a fight. And how beautiful that with Steve Rogers' continued survival, he might know another fight like that yet again. What a wonderful waking dream. Abel's body hit the floor motionless, ready for collection and to return to his containment chamber. Much to Steve's horror, the armed mobile task force members did not hesitate. Unaware of Abel's anomalous powers, Steve watched in shock as they aimed their rifles at the fallen warrior and unleashed a relentless barrage. 100 rounds tore into Abel's body, the grim necessary number it usually took to put him down. All of this hardened Captain America's resolve. This organization was inhumane. It was evil. They didn't care for humans or any life, and would happily look away or execute these anomalous individuals without any due process. He would bring this corrupt system down, but today, it seemed, would not be the day that he did. As the MTF squads executed Abel, fully aware that his body would soon reappear in its black sarcophagus, Captain America sprinted in the opposite direction. The decimated halls echoed with gunfire as he charged forward, plowing through squads of guards with effortless strength. Any stray bullets that came his way clanged harmlessly against his vibranium shield. Soon he busted out of the front gate of the building and disappeared into the night. From here, he'd lay low, regroup, and plan his next attack against the SCP Foundation. One thing that's always true of Captain America is that he'll stick to his principles: freedom, truth, and justice, even if nobody else would. And soon enough, the SCP Foundation would find out yet again just how committed to these ideals the good captain was, and why you should live in fear if you find yourself defying them. Now go check out SCP Foundation Contains One Punch Man, Saitama's Big Surprise, and Can the SCP Foundation Contain Omni-Man? For more.